responses from people in the audience, but if there's any issues with that, just let me know early on so we can rectify that. But yeah, it's always going to be on me anyway. So, my name's Matt Jenkins. I am the director, founder of the Mensana Movement. It's a behaviour change consultancy, coaching company that only started 3-4 months ago, so quite new. So Happy New Year. It's 2019. I always get confused as to where the cut-off is for saying Happy New Year. It's like the 4th week of January now. And I was saying to Kay, who works here earlier, like, can you still say Happy New Year in the 4th week of January? I think so. So yeah, Happy New Year, and well done, you made it to 2019. So like I said, this is part 2. Doesn't matter if you didn't come to part 1, it's all good. We're going to be revisiting some of that stuff and give you a chance to reevaluate stuff if you were here the first time as well. Cool. So I think I've become a bit of a walking cliche over the last few years because I've become a bit obsessed with the idea of behaviour change. I've been doing this for years now. I'm a researcher, look at behaviour change at university. I think since the age of 11, 12, my mum used to be in Weight Watchers. So even as a young child, I was the guy that was tagging along to all these Weight Watching meetings, so I got a very early exposure to this idea of behaviour change and how we can go about it. So if I've had any conversations with any of you this year so far, I've probably asked you about your resolutions and what you're trying to change, how you're trying to change it, and what you're doing to actually action those changes. So I think my friends are getting quite bored of me doing this at this point. But I can't help it, it's like a compulsion to me. This is like my favourite time of year, right? It's all about behaviour change and these resolutions. So hopefully today you're going to get some good tips and techniques in terms of behaviour change and what we can do to actually change for good rather than short-term change. That's what we're all about here. I mean, myself, I've struggled quite a lot over the last 20 odd years, especially in the teenage years. I wasn't very active, wasn't very fit, put on quite a lot of weight, so I've been very up and down. I went to university, became fit again, and then post-university got an office job and ended up, putting on a bit of weight again. So it's been very up and down life for me in terms of change of behaviour. And that's what got me into this idea of looking into it in terms of research. That's why I research, because I wanted to understand how people change and do it for the long term. To the point where I've just finished my PhD last year at the University of Otago, and that was in exercise, motivation and long-term behaviour change. So it does turn out as a career in asking these sorts of questions, which is always good. So in terms of resolutions, there's lots of different types of resolutions that you'll be here for. I've heard some really good ones so far this year. Some people say they want to say yes to more things. Some people say they want to say no to more things. Some people say that they want to eat healthy, get more exercise, all that sort of stuff. So those are the classic resolutions. So just be aware that everyone in this room, there's going to be such a wide variety of resolutions that people come with. And I think a workshop like this is really cool because we get to share all these resolutions together. And I'm not saying that I've got the answers to everyone's resolution problems, but at least as a community we can come together and share ideas and strategies, and hopefully we can actually come to some resolutions ourselves today. Cool. So that's the beauty of this type of workshop, we actually get to share. Has everyone got the worksheet in front of them? Cindy, do you have one? You got a pen? Chris? Cool. So again, these do sort of follow on from the first workshop, but like I said, I can easily send you the first slides from the first workshop as well if you wanted to do those when you get back. But we're going to cover most of it again today. Okay. So the first thing I asked you to do was to write down your resolutions. Has everyone done that? First task. Does anyone want to share what their resolutions are? Got any sharers in the room? Yeah? Meditate daily. That's a really good one. And something that's going to come into the slides later, actually. Is anyone else trying to meditate at the moment? Bring it into life? Yeah? Cool. What sort of ways are you doing that? Are you using any apps or... Okay. There's some good ideas for meditation.
Motivation is my biggest concern, to be able to motivate myself.
For what? Anything particular?
Mainly exercise, being a type 2 diabetes.
Yeah.
For 30 years I relied on medication until my sister-in-law said to me, you know, you can beat it, beat medication. And I said, how? He said, well, by exercising. Do you do a lot of walking? I said, around the table, that's about all. But seriously, I really gave a big thought over the break.
Yeah.
On the insulin and Nova Rapid. And she said to me, the sister-in-law said to me, she said, you can beat all that by turning your life around and exercising and there. So that is that is my ultimate this year.
You've come to the right place. That's perfect.
Yeah.
I think talk about exercise is really important, and not just the idea of exercising, but just being more physically active. There's this difference between exercising, which means going to the gym and all that sort of stuff, but just being more active by walking, for example, is really, really good. And exercise is also, we call it a cornerstone habit, because if you exercise well, if you're physically active on a regular basis, same as mindfulness and meditation, it's sort of everything else clicks into place as well. It doesn't just have benefits for your physical health, it's also your psychological health as well, right? Everything is better when you're physically active or when you're meditating as well. It's really good. So we call it a cornerstone habit, so that's really good. Any more resolutions? Anyone else want to share?
Not to own my client's work.
That's a good one. So keeping work at work, not bringing them home. Yeah, do you mind if I ask you what your work is?
I'm a land surveyor.
Okay, yeah. So how would you do that? Have you got any actions or strategies in place for that?
Yes, I've got a series of switches that I imagine in front of me, and I turn them all off.
Visualization, yeah. And this is what I love, because that's taking, sports psychologists, for example, have known this for years about visualization and using that in an everyday setting. But I think there's so much opportunity to bring that into every person's life, the idea of visualization. So I really like that one, that's really cool. Might revisit that later.
I think he's been watching too much Coronation Street.
Oh, I don't watch Coronation Street, what's
You
happening?
must, but it's just in there at the moment.
Oh, is it?
Coronation Street. Precisely there.
What, someone taking their work home or the
Now,
visualization?
doing weird things to make things better.
Yeah.
Flicking switches on and off.
Are you watching Coronation Street, Simon?
So cheap.
But yeah, that's cool. But I guess the point of that is just to show that there's lots of different resolutions that are out there. There's loads of different ways of approaching resolutions. There's no one clear, correct way. There's no wrong way. Well, there are some wrong ways, I guess. But whatever works for you.
I have a problem when I go to bed at night, still taking my work with me, and but these little voices still do. I can't switch them off.
Okay.
So I wanted to get some strategies to not be a workaholic.
Well, that brings up the sleep, because sleep again, it's like everyone's saying the exact same things that I really want. This is what I wanted to say, but sleep comes up in this as well, because sleep's another cornerstone habit, and being able to get these good sleep hygiene routines is really, really important, because if you're not sleeping, then everything else falls apart. And if you get a good night's sleep, the world looks so much better, right? So we're going to be talking about sleep a bit later. I've been really obsessed with sleep recently, so not because I'm sleeping a lot, but just so we said 2019, so well done for making it here. The thing is with 2009, well, with any new year, not just 2019, is that this idea when you make resolutions and the clock strikes 12, and lots of people have these expectations that the next day they're going to be this different person, as if it magically happens, right? Sort of a reverse Cinderella effect, we call it. As if there's no effort that's needed. As long as you just say the words that you're going to do this thing, then it's magically going to happen. But the problem is the body doesn't get this memo. The body doesn't know, or most of the time the mind doesn't know that you're trying to change behaviour. So there's always this resistance when you try and change behaviour. And the bigger the change that you're trying to make, the harder it is to get it going. So sometimes we need a little bit of a kickstart. So part of this is just making sure that we're realistic in our expectations about what we're trying to change. We can't just flick a switch. We're not just going to go to midnight and all of a sudden we've changed completely. So this is, especially January, it's the sort of time that the resolutions start to wobble a bit. It's a few weeks in. We've made these big statements about what we're going to change, and now we start to realise that actually it might not go so smoothly as we thought it was going to on the 31st of December. Does that resonate with anybody in here? Yeah, so we know that there's always going to be a bit of resistance when you're trying to change behaviour, and that's really important to acknowledge, I think. So this is just a quick run through of what we did last time. You probably won't be able to read that, but the first one was all about motivation. So we did some values exercises and working out what matters to people, because the idea is if you make resolutions in line with what you value, you're more likely to stick to them. It's pretty basic. So either when you make a resolution, it should be something that you either enjoy or something that you can find the value in. So this quote here by Stephen Covey, you can't read it. Motivation is a fire within. If someone tries to light that fire under you, chances are it will burn very briefly. So the idea is to make resolutions that align with what you care about, not that somebody else cares about. That's really important. We talked about goals. SMART goals. Does anyone know what SMART goals are? Have we come across them before? Cool. So we went across those in the first workshop. But what we do, what I do is not just make SMART goals, but make smarter goals. So that's the usual SMART goals, but then we evaluate and reevaluate, so they make them, revisiting these goals on a regular basis. So that's what we'll be doing again today. And the idea of setting the right sort of goal in terms of challenging. So you want a goal that's not too hard. You want to be able to achieve it, otherwise your confidence is going to take a knock. But it's also something that's not too easy. So we call them Goldilocks goals. We talked about the importance of accountability and getting the right social support in place. Cindy, you're a great example of this with Air Fitness, because Cindy runs Air Fitness, which is a health club in town, and the community in that place is amazing, right? And it really helps people stick to their resolutions a lot of the time, so it's really cool. If anyone understands this, I'll give them $10 on the spot. Remember this from the first one, anyone? Remember what it represented?
Something about a pie?
Almost. It's the cake.
Yeah.
So this is a genuine formula that I got from a research paper, and this is why I hate statistics. But there's a research paper that talks about the cake formula, and this is about how much willpower we have in a day. So if we're making big changes, it's really hard to make lots of big changes together because we just haven't got the willpower to stick to all these new changes, right? So someone somewhere came up with this formula, which is essentially the cake formula, and says that the capacity to resist from eating cake goes down as the day goes on because you're doing all these other things. So essentially that's just saying that willpower is not unlimited. There's always a limit to willpower. You don't need to memorise that. It's not going to be tested afterwards. And then challenges is the final one. So recognising barriers and how we can overcome those barriers. So this is what we did in the first one. Again, we're going to be revisiting some of those, but we're going to be doing some more exciting stuff as well, including habits today. But first, I want to talk about something that is really important when we're changing behaviour. So we just said it's the first month, and this is a month where things start to have a little bit of a wobble, and there might be some failure already. What I want to get across today that failure isn't a dirty word. It's a good thing to do. I think sometimes there's this lack of expectation of failure. We think we're going to succeed, or we avoid failure by not even trying in the first place. But failure is actually a really important aspect of changing behaviour. We need to go through these experiences, and we'll see why in a second. So, does anyone know this guy here? Michael Jordan. Obviously best known for his starring role in Space Jam, the 90s animated movie. Has anyone seen that movie? It's been remade as well, yeah. Yeah. who is it? I can't remember his playing next time. But Michael Jordan was one of the greatest basketball players that ever lived. One of the greatest sports people that ever lived. And he had a really cool quote about failure. So I've missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. I've lost almost 300 games. 26 times I've been trusted to take the game-winning shot and missed. I've failed over and over again, 3 times in my life. So there's this idea that even someone as successful as Michael Jordan uses failure as a learning experience. It's a really important aspect of what he does, and to get to the top, that's what he's done. And although we're not all striving to be elite sports people, it's still a really important lesson for everybody that failure isn't a dirty word, it's something that we should go through to get to success. So it's a learning experience, it's not something to be afraid of. It's this idea, if we're trying to do something that really matters to us, if we're trying to change behaviour for the better, it's not just a straightforward line from trying to succeed. There's all these loops that go back. So you try, you fail, you try again. You might fail again, but you're always learning something new every time. So failure is only really failure if you're not learning from these experiences, which I think is a really important lesson. So, a little exercise here. So whenever you see this little pen, it means that there's an exercise. Just want you to think about the last time that you failed in anything. It could be a big failure, a small failure. And just write it down on the paper. If anyone wants to share, feel free. When was the last time you failed at doing something? Does anyone have anything that comes to mind?
Last night.
What happened last night?
I've got the classic successful eating through this year.
Yep.
And I work nights, so we talked about sleep, sort of non-existent really.
Yeah.
Really tired. First thing I did when I got to work was get stuck into, I had 2 lecturers, that's really good.
That's good, yeah.
Yeah, and then about 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, I discovered the cake in the cupboard. And I had a piece of the toast, and by the time I came home, I was very full and not feeling very well.
Yeah. So what would you learn from that experience?
I was just thinking about that when I was reading this before, and I need to, I'm being more mindful and maybe distract by doing other things rather than just sitting there going, I'll have something to eat. Because the brain switches off and I go into automatic mode.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So I
precisely.
need to actually get up, maybe move, and
Yeah, so talking about these habitual responses, and that's something we'll be talking about soon, is the idea that, yeah, being mindful is a really good one. So through that failure, you've learned that you need to be mindful of.
again and again.
Yeah. It's repetition, right? Like, it's not just a one-off. That's the thing with changing behaviour. It's not just a one-off decision. You have to keep making that decision and recommitting. So that's a really important thing to learn. Any others? Any other sharers? Like failures?
I was 20 minutes late to an appointment yesterday.
Oh yeah. What was the lesson?
I left with ample time, but then I got petrol, and I didn't actually know where I was going. Like, I didn't have a map or anything, so like when I got to town, I then assumed in my head and believed that I had enough time. So
Yeah.
I had to do a whole lot of things that I kind of like had put to the back of my head.
Yeah.
Planning.
Yeah, planning preparation.
Maps, know where you're going.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff.
And that planning preparation goes through, again, it goes through all behaviour change as well, right? Like, it's really important. And that's what we're doing now, and that's what we did last month as well. Yeah, I had a good example of this, like, for me at school, when I was 14, 15, I failed multiple exams. I became very complacent at school. I think when I was growing up, I was told that I was a clever child, and I never actually worked then from that point onwards. So I failed at exams, barely scraped through to get to college. But my learning from that was that not to be complacent, and it takes hard work to get to somewhere. And I think that's something I've carried throughout my career now. So yeah, that was my big failure. So it doesn't have to be a life-changing failure. Sometimes they're small failures, sometimes they're big ones. But always try to learn at least one thing from failure. I think it's really important. The failure journal. So I use this throughout my PhD. I certainly use one of these. So failure journal is just essentially a journal where you write down what a failure was, if you failed to do something, what caused the failure, and then trying to take the lesson from it. So it doesn't have to be a journal, it could just be like just writing it down on a Sunday night. And this is what I used to do. Sounds very geeky, but I used to book out time with myself on Sunday nights, 8 o'clock, and I'll sit there and I'll think about the things that happened that week and what I messed up in and what I could do better. So it's a bit of reflection. But I think keeping a failure journal is a good practice. Like I said, it doesn't have to be a formal failure journal, but just making notes of things when they go wrong is really cool. So for example, this one used to be a common one for me, miss an exercise session would be my failure. Usually because I get hungry. Sounds like a real basic thing, but I'd always convince myself that I was too hungry to go for a run or too hungry to go to the gym. So what could be done differently next time? What did I learn from that? Just plan the day better, like we said before, planning, just prepare. So then I was just to pack my bag with snacks and stuff so I knew that I wouldn't, if I got hungry, I could eat something on the way. And these are examples from people that I've worked with before. So we talked about meditation earlier. A lady I was working with missed the meditation session and she it was always because the kids were too loud, she couldn't find that quiet place to meditate, which I think is quite a common one. But we talked about how she can make it a priority to meditate. And as soon as you make something a priority, you seem to be able to find time for things. I think that's always the case. If it moves up the priority list, you can usually find time for it. Cigarettes. I've got a few friends on this one. So failure was buying a pack of cigarettes when you said that you're going to stop. Often the cause is either a stressful day or lots of the time it's alcohol. They have a pint of beer, they go out and buy a pack of cigarettes. It's very common. The learning from this is trying to find different ways of dealing with stress, for example. It's a really important one. And then, another client of mine made a resolution to stick to cycling to work on a daily basis, but this is Dunedin. I mean, you're going to expect bad weather, right, once in a while. So he learned from that he needs a plan B for exercise, which is to say that if he's going to use his commute as exercise, he's got to find another thing to do if bad weather kicks in, which is pretty much half the year. And then also just to get rainwear so he can protect himself. So, in the words of Thomas Edison, famous inventor, I've not failed, I've just found 10,000 ways that don't work. So this idea that failure doesn't have to be a bad thing, it's not a dirty word, it's something that we should be embracing and something that we should learn on as much as possible. Does that make sense? Cool. So we're going to leave failure behind now and move on to goal setting. So again, this is what we did in the first workshop. We set these SMART goals. So SMART goals, I'll go through them anyway, just in case anybody's never came across them before. But SMART goals stand for specific. So specific goals. So actually, basically, if you did this in December, today we're going to go into SMARTer goals, which is evaluating and re-evaluating your goals. If this is the first time you've come across SMART goals, then we'll just go through it anyway for the first time. So specific. Goals and resolutions need to be as specific as possible. So just saying that you want to be healthy, for example, is really vague. Does that mean that you're going to exercise more? Does it mean you're going to eat better? How much exercise are you going to do? What are you going to eat exactly? The more specific you can be about these actions that you're going to take towards your behaviour change, the more successful you're going to be. So there's a space on that worksheet there to actually write down some really specific actions that you could do towards your goal. Measured. So if you've got a goal or a resolution, how are you measuring it? So if you're exercising, for example, you might use smartwatches, you can use a daily log. There's lots of different ways of measuring exercise. Accountable. So this is all about having good social support around you and actually telling your goals to people. So if you did this last time, if if you chose those accountability buddies that we talked about, how's that working out for you? It's a good time to review this and try and work out if these people are the best people to be supporting you. Because, as you said before, when we're choosing accountability buddies, we should be choosing people that are going to support us and not trying to be diplomatic about this, but people who don't support us, I guess. So some people are more supportive than others in terms of actually helping us change. Then realistic. So are your resolutions within reach? Are there too many of them? So this is something we're going to be talking about in a bit anyway, but this goes back to the CAPE formula. If you're trying to do too many different things at once, trying to change too many different things at once, or trying to make changes that are too large, then maybe we need to draw them back a little bit and make them a little bit easier so they're more achievable. There's no definitive end to it, but at least we should make a review date for them. So for example, those people that were here in December, today is your review date for this. So trying to work out if you're still on course for your resolutions. Has anyone got any examples of specific actions they've got for their resolutions?
I set 2 goals this year, so I set them for 2019 rather than for I'm going to get fitter.
Oh yeah.
And so I just put 2019 no sugar, so it's really measurable.
Yeah.
Don't have it. And then 20 minutes of exercise, but that could be any exercise, and it could be a whole lot more than that, but there was a minimum.
Yeah.
And that it was just every day of 20 minutes.
That's good. The minimum thing is a really good thing to do, as
Yeah.
opposed to trying to say I'm going to do 30 minutes of
Yeah, but
exercise.
it means I can do yoga on a day for 20 minutes when I really don't feel like going for a run.
Yeah.
But it's, and that's, so that's the measure, it's a block, a chunk of time.
And I think that's a really good point. Talk about, for example, if your resolution is to exercise more, you can be a bit flexible in what that exercise is. If you don't want to go for a run, go and do something else. Do something that you enjoy doing. It's the idea of choice, and that's something we talked about in the first workshop as well. So don't always feel like you have to do this really structured thing. Just go and do something that's at least moving you towards your resolution in some way. So that's a really cool one. Yeah. And
It's the first time I've ever stuck to exercising every day too, because
Yeah.
there is that, and to be honest, I've actually done more of the harder stuff because I don't have to.
Yeah. Yeah, it feels like a choice that you're making as opposed to being told that you need to do this.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, it's really good. Thanks, Evan. Any more? Okay. What have we got next? Barriers, challenges. So, again, did this in the first one. So for those people that were here in the first workshop, we wrote down some barriers. Did those barriers actually come up? Or are they just things that you anticipate that didn't actually manifest at all? And for those of you who weren't here, what barriers have you come across when you've been trying to make these resolutions? This is a really important thing to know, to understand your own barriers to stuff. It's a sort of know your enemy. You need to know what you need to overcome, because then you become better prepared for it. So, has anyone got any examples of roadblocks you've come up against?
So I know, like, on the meditating one,
Yeah.
I know that my family was always really on the go, like working all the time, and so I have this belief that rest is not valuable, that rest is a waste of time.
Yeah, okay.
And so for me, meditation is like doing nothing, which is being lazy.
Yeah.
So I've got this big paradigm to get over.
Yeah, that's so. One of the things I was going to say is about the barriers. They can be mental or they can be physical, right? I mean, logistical. It's usually time's a huge one. But what you're saying there about taking that 5-10 minutes to do nothing and seeing it as being lazy, that's a really good point, because you look at things like Yin Yoga now, which is so popular. It's all about the fact that as a society we're moving so quickly. It's actually really important to take that time for yourself. So even if it's 5 minutes sitting in silence, it's actually quite important. But it does take that paradigm shift, doesn't it, for you?
I know it intellectually,
Yeah.
but I'm fighting, a lifetime of conditioning to,
Yeah.
to view the world a certain way, and it's hard.
I'm in the same boat as well. Yeah, sure. Yeah, you get told that you have to tick off these to-do lists, and you have to be there and then be there. So it's really hard to slow down sometimes. So it's a good barrier. It's good to be aware of that barrier because at least you know it, right? That's the first step. Is just actually being aware of it in the first place.
Last time I meditated, which was last week, because I struggle with doing it by myself as well, and okay, if I meditate in a group,
Yes.
there's that forced kind of thing, but
Yeah.
what I did is I chucked on a face mask, and so like I had to sit there, and I found that so relaxing, because it's like, well, I'm doing something for my skin and for my mind, and I found it really helpful.
There we go.
And you can't really go anywhere
Yeah.
very easily.
Exactly.
And that's exactly what I mean. That's what's great about this workshop, having those sort of little solutions that other people use. So that's really cool. Thanks for sharing that one. Yeah. Any other ones? Yes.
Well, my barrier was kind of not being ready in some social situations. So my resolution was to be more honest with myself and others. Not that I'm a compulsive liar, but just that sometimes I say what people want to hear instead of what I'm actually thinking. And usually it's because perhaps I'm a little bit anxious in the situation. So my barrier is running out of time before I get to the social situation to prepare myself for how I want to interact in that situation. So the way that's really been helping me to overcome that is I read about these transition meditations, and you just sit for like 1 minute with your eyes closed before you're going to go into a situation that you think you might trip up in, and just like think about what the ideal situation would look like for you.
So your intentions and things like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Because I was finding it hard to come up with really concrete ways to get over it, because it seems like a very wishy-washy kind of goal. So that was my way of finding a concrete way to overcome it, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's it, because you do sometimes resolutions can be seen as being wishy-washy, but it's really good to put some concrete actions in there, right? And as soon as you make, and that's being specific again, it's really nailing down that specific action that you need to take to meet that resolution. That's a really good one, yeah. And the transition meditations, which we've read about as well, are really cool, because talking about the yin and relaxing and stuff, another thing that we struggle with, I think, like these days, is multitasking. We're always doing lots of different things. You know, my brain's got too many tabs open, sort of thing, which is really common nowadays. Because we're always trying to do lots of different things. So that transition meditation, where you just take a minute just to sit there, completely clear your mind before moving on to the next task, is really good. And they're also really nice because they're just bite-sized. Rather than saying that you need to sit there for 10 minutes in silence, it's just 1 minute, and it makes a big difference. Yeah, cool. Any more barriers, roadblocks?
Mine is just having too many things on the list to do, and so although this list here might be really important today, I find myself being distracted continually by other things so that I don't actually achieve anything.
Yeah, it's a hard. There's lots of research about how useful multitasking is, because it means that you don't focus on one thing, because you've always got other things to do, and the size of a to-do list. And I suffer from this as well. You end up with this list that it's not realistic in achieving. So sometimes it's good to actually have, like, instead of having a daily to-do list, have a weekly to-do list or a monthly to-do list. So at least you know that if you can't do this task today, you can transfer it to another day, and that makes it, I think, relieves that pressure a little bit. At least it does for me, and that's my strategy for it. But yeah, I suffer from the same thing in having that mental barrier. Has anyone got any strategies for that in terms of? Yes, Joe.
My to-do list is never ending, so it's just a fluid thing that I write down things that come to mind and put it on the to-do list, and then I set myself time to do my to-do list.
So you're almost at peace with the fact that it's always going to be there, and it's this to-do list that's constantly there.
And as long as I can visually see that I've crossed some things off it, 3 things a day is the goal.
Yeah, you've got to be realistic.
And
right?
it's really, really helpful.
Cool. Yep.
It's more or less the same, but I changed my narrative, because the moment I fail at one thing, it's as if you start looking for failure. I think it's how our brain patterns work. So,
Yeah.
so if you can tell any story and change it with I've failed or I've succeeded in something else. So we tend to, I tend to be very stuck on, okay, so this is what should be done. But then sometimes life takes you
Other
in another
directions.
path. Your neighbour come but so look at what happened, and you actually find that you've succeeded in a lot of those goals,
Yeah.
but you don't notice it because you get so stuck. So for me, and I still struggle with that, but the biggest change is for me is to change the narrative and just, because if I can succeed 3 times a day, say for example, I can tick off and I feel I'm going somewhere. But if you don't, then you feel you're a failure. And if you just change the narrative, I think all of us can find 3 or 4 things that we've really achieved.
Yeah, so emphasise the positives and the successes rather than emphasising the things that you haven't done, is what you're saying, yeah.
I use my phone, so if I'm studying, I set it for 45 minutes and I'm not allowed to move.
Yeah.
The alarm goes off, and then I set it for 10 minutes so I can do whatever I like.
Yep.
But then I have to go back, and I find that really helpful, and I'm non-negotiable. No one's going to visit.
It's that structure, isn't it? Yeah.
Is that true?
Yeah, that's true.
Sorry, not
Yeah.
available. Maybe in this time, but just have real clear boundaries.
That's a really good one. There's a Pomodoros. Have you heard of Pomodoros before? So 25 minutes. You can get apps for it now. It sets a time for 25 minutes. After 25 minutes, you got to focus for that 25 minutes, and the timer goes off, and you've got 5 minutes of doing anything you want. You can, like you said, if you're studying, you get up, having a walk around is a really good thing to do. Just to, I'm obviously a physical activity advocate. But doing anything for that 5 minutes, then you can revisit it. So Pomodoro technique, and that's really similar. It's the same thing, just with 45 minutes as opposed to 25. So yeah. Yep.
Going back to this lady's point about lists that are not achieved, I worked on that by, I was always underestimating the amount of time that any task would take.
Yeah.
And so then I just switched it round and completely overestimated, I'm going to phone up Trustpower to sort out my bill. And it's, I'm going to be asked to hold for 20 minutes so I'm going to actually set myself an hour and a half to do this task instead of 10 minutes.
Yeah, that's a good one.
And then if I got through on the line, I finished it in 15 minutes.
Yeah.
But I had psyched myself up for the hour and a half, and it was really kind of just liberating. Oh, I've done that one.
Yeah.
And it only took 10 minutes rather than the opposite way round.
That's really good. Yeah.
I really did I was seriously just underestimating that I could get 6 things within the hour.
Yeah.
And it was and then got the frustration and the failure. But just one thing and giving it this massive amount of time that was almost...
Yeah, that's really good. It's just a whole mindset change, isn't it? Overestimating how much time it's going to take for one task.
And it really freed up my head, really, space about anything,
Yeah. I think a lot of us could probably learn from that, Yeah. True.
I find just generally being kinder to myself at the end of the day really helps as well, because I'm an artist and some days I can work all day and feel like I've gone backwards, and just looking at that, and instead of being like, what a waste, I usually just say, well, that's what happened and there's nothing you can do about it now, go to sleep, oh my god, go to sleep, and then the next day, who knows, maybe what you did yesterday, if you did nothing, you actually can tie up things a lot faster. So
Yeah, for sure. I think there's always things that happen in the background that they're not intentional, but they sometimes move you towards the goal.
Yeah.
The bigger goal, bigger picture.
I think we're all a bit addicted to ticking the box and getting the the little green tick next to it.
Yeah.
And that
It's
you
very
can't do that
satisfying,
every day.
isn't it?
It is really satisfying.
Is there any physiological evidence that, like, you get a dopamine hit or something when you imagine your list and then you tick? Is there some physiological...
I've read something once, about reframing. Adrienne would be good at this, wouldn't she? We've got a friend who runs a Adapting Brains business, and she talks about neurotransmitters and how they can be affected by things like this, ticking to-do lists off.
For every bad thing we say to each other, we have to say 3 nice things.
Yeah.
And you think about the self-talk.
Self-compassion,
You didn't do that, you didn't do that, you didn't do that. Well, there's 3 things I've got to say 9 good things about what I
Yeah.
did do. And it does, it works.
Yeah, self-talk is really important. Another sports psychology skill, like it's something we've got to reclaim from sports psychologists. Right. What we got next? Habits. Oh, here's a question. How long does it take to form a habit? This is going to be the crux of the workshop now. 21 days. Any other advances on that?
66 days.
66 days. Any more?
39 times a day.
3 days.
More than one. 49 times a day.
Honestly,
Just once if you like it.
yeah. Well, that's a good point actually. We'll talk about that soon. But there's this thing about it takes 21 days to form a habit, and you also have, I've heard it so many different answers to this question. It takes 12 weeks. It takes 6 months. Actually, we have no idea, and it's not that we don't have an idea. It's just that it varies so much. Depends on the person. Depends on the habit that you're trying to bring in. Depends on the strength of the old habit that you're trying to replace. So making a really small change might be real quick, especially if you enjoy doing it, which doesn't feel like it's making a habit then. But yeah, it's a bit of a... So you see all these... I know it's really popular nowadays to go on 21-day courses, and they can be really good, don't get me wrong. I think they're amazing because they get people engaged, especially if it's a group course, because that's really important for social support. But don't always expect you to have formed a habit after 21 days or even 12 weeks, because it can sometimes take much longer, especially if your older habits go against the ones that you're trying to form. So it's just a bit of a myth dispelling there. It doesn't always take 21 days to form a habit. Second one, this isn't really a myth, it's only partly true. So motivation is what gets you started, habit is what keeps you going. Habit is what keeps you going, but also, as we learned in the first workshop, motivation is just as important. It gets you started, but it also keeps you going as well, as long as what you're doing, the habit that you're trying to form, is in line with your values, and that if you enjoy it, it's not going to feel like a habit at all. So that's partly true. And this one, we first make our habits, and then our habits make us. So this is I really like this quote actually. It actually falls in line with the motivation side as well, because it gives the idea that we can make our habits... I mean, habits are automatic, they're usually automatic responses to situations. And we can become a little bit of a slave to our habits sometimes, especially the bad ones. But this quote indicates that we can actually take control of our own habits, and we can make a life that is fulfilling to us. And this is really important to remember, because if we understand how habits work, we can make them work for us. And that's a really important thing. So that's what we're going to be looking at now, is habits and habit cues and all that sort of stuff. So what are habits? Does anyone know the definition of a habit? Right, we'll get into that in a second. But first, just wanted to take a moment to appreciate your brain. So, your brain, 3 pound lump of flesh in your skull, it performs miracles on a daily basis. It performs calculations much faster than any supercomputer. I read a research article the other day that said it was 1 billion calculations per second. I think that might be a bit optimistic, I'm not sure, but it works very hard. Your brain is always working, even when you're sleeping. So you can forgive your brain if it takes a few shortcuts now and again, because it's always, the amount of energy that it expends, it likes to take shortcuts. So habits is essentially a shortcut, because a habit is an automatic response to something. Habits take out the mental energy that's required to make a decision, for example. Habits just come naturally. And habits are really important. Brains don't just make habits because for the sake of it. They actually make habits to free up the brain for the important stuff, like what movie to decide to watch on Netflix, which is obviously one of the important decisions of our times. So when we think about habits, some common habits, for example, when you get into a car, what's the first thing you do? Belt up. So whenever you get into a car nowadays, you belt up. It's the first thing you do. It's a habit that you've made over the course of however many years. You get told to do it, and you know, it's just one of those things, well, hopefully you do it all the time. Does anyone know the exception to the belt up rule? Good old Prince Philip, you see this? So last week he had a crash in his Land Rover, and then 2 days after his crash he got caught by the police getting into his car and not belting up. So Prince Philip, you can't even blame it on dementia, because habits actually do continue throughout your whole life. So Prince Philip's been a naughty boy.
You need to colour the eye a wee bit blacker.
Let's go back to him.
Black eye.
Oh yeah, true. Yeah. You know, actually the weird thing is I never thought I'd actually give a talk and have Prince Philip in one of the slides. But not only that, we had so much fun last night trying to work out which exit effects really fit in with Prince Philip's personality. And I think the pinwheel, I think he'd really appreciate that. So hopefully this goes viral and he gets to see it at some point. But yeah, so belting up when you get into a car is a habit that most people, the majority of people have actually developed, right? It's a really important life-saving habit that we've made. So it's important to know that if we understand our habits, we can change our habits. This is the fundamental aspect. If we can understand them, we can change them. So there's 3 parts to a habit, or habit forming. So we've got a cue, which is something that's usually in the environment or something that's internal. We've got a response or behaviour, which is usually the habit that's formed. And we've got an outcome, which is a reward. So cues can come in many forms. We've got location, it could be a locational cue, for example, being in a library. What's the response to being in a library? What's the habitual cue? Being quiet, right? Feelings, so anxiety or stress. We've got environmental cues, so green light. So if you see a green light, what does it mean? Yeah. And these things you don't have to think about, they're just there all the time. It's something that's become a habit, it's an habitual response. And time of day, for example, lunchtime. I know it's lunchtime because my stomach starts telling me at 12 o'clock. And prior action, so getting into a car. So actions that you carry out before can lead to the next habit. So responses, as we said, library, you know, being quiet. If you feel anxiety or stress, and this applies to smokers in particular, you light up a cigarette. The environment, green light. If you see a green light, it usually means go. Lunchtime means eat. And getting into a car means putting on a seatbelt. So these are the cues. Library, feeling anxious or stressed out. Green light, lunchtime, getting into a car. And then we have all these sort of habitual responses to these cues, right? Well, not all of us smoke, right? None of us. And then the outcome. So if the outcome's a positive outcome, it means that the reward, the habit is more likely to be formed because that repetition of cue and response is going to happen. So if you're in a library and you're quiet, it means that you don't get told off. That's the outcome. That's a good thing. If you're a smoker and you smoke as a response to anxiety or stress, there's the perceived stress release. It's not really stress relief, but that's what you perceive it to be. You don't crash if you go on a green light. Increased energy if you eat at lunchtime, and it's increased safety if you put on a seatbelt. So all these things come together. So like I said, if it's a positive outcome, the likelihood of a habit being made is much higher. So habits become strong mainly by repetition, which is why rewards can be really important in forming habits, because they're more likely to be repeated the more we actually get rewarded for it. So the more we repeat the habit, this cue and response, the stronger that habit becomes. There's that whole the saying, if neurons fire together, they wire together, so they become together. And then we have these really strong neurochemical rewards that we get for certain things. So things like smoking, drinking, and nowadays our smartphones, they release dopamine, for example, which is a really important neurochemical when it comes to rewards. And these can actually increase the habit real quickly. And that's why we get so addicted to drinking, smoking, and now our phones. And also some people, believe it or not, do get addicted to exercise, endorphins and dopamine again. So, just wanted to reflect for a second and think about your habit cues. So, what sort of cues? Think of a habit first, obviously, and then try and think of what cues those habit What cues in the environment or what sort of location cues come about? Could be any habit. Just try and think of what cues it. Because this is a really important aspect if we're trying to change behaviour, is being aware of our own cues. Like I mentioned before, my big cues is lunchtime. That's the time of the day, midday. I know it's time for eating because my stomach tells me. First thing to do is get some food. So that's my cue. I've got lots of cues for drinking coffee, it seems. Although that's one of my resolutions this year, is to have 1 coffee a day. So, but I know that whenever after lunch, it was always my habitual response was to have a coffee. First thing in the morning. But I've had to sort of try and be aware of that cue and cut it down a little bit. Have 1 coffee a day now. So has anyone got any habits they want to share and their cues, associated cues? Could be a good habit, bad habit, neutral habit.
I think one of the new habits you're going to get in touch with is make sure you take your grocery bag to the supermarket.
Very good one. Yeah. So what's the cue for that habit? Or what could be the cue for that habit? In fact, supermarkets have done this now, yeah. Yeah, they have a sign on the front door now saying, have you got your bag? So I think the idea behind that is to create this habit that people have to remember, and they'll sort of marry up that and they'll end up taking their bags on a regular basis. Because I mean, I get caught out still when I get to the supermarket. Sometimes I forget my bags at home. But they're trying to get that habit into people at the moment. It's a really important one as well, yeah. Any other habits? Individuals?
Reading my book when I have my breakfast in the afternoon, it's a pleasant time. I don't know if that counts what I'm talking about, but there is a routine I go through. I've got 2 dogs and a cat.
Yep.
And they're companion about, and it's a very pleasant time for us. And it's the coffee and my breakfast, and usually the sunshine outside, and that quiet time for reading.
Yeah. I think it's that's a nice one, right? It's a nice coupling, and we'll talk about coupling soon as well, like 2 habits that come together. So what's the cue there, and what's the habit? What comes first?
Cue is probably the waking up, the routine of waking up.
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah. Routine is it.
And it always follows the same pattern.
Yeah.
So I've got a medication I need to take. Take that, or go and have a look round outside while that works, and come out and I'll get the coffee machine going, and I get my toast and my bagel and the toaster, and
Yeah.
there's a set of things.
Well, again, we are going to be talking about these little mini routines that you can put into your day. So it's habit stacking, where you stack lots of habits together. So that's really cool. Did we talk about one earlier? I'm just trying to get back into my memory.
I've got a really interesting.
Thanks, Joe. You saved me there.
Part of being an ex-police officer, I tend to respond aggressively to being confronted.
Okay. Yeah.
Because that is what I had to do. And now I need to learn not to be like a cornered cat when confronted with aggression.
Yeah.
And I've been struggling with it because I find myself, wanting to pounce in and get involved, and I'm teaching myself to stop and just watch what's happening before I jump in with my mouth and my body.
Yeah.
So it's a really, really tough one for me.
So that's an example of a habit that served you really well in the past, but now you're in a different context. It doesn't serve you very well at all. So you've got to try and work out what that cue is, which is the aggressive behaviour or confrontational behaviour from someone else, and trying to break that cue and response up, right? Because that's what we want to do. If you've got a bad habit that we're trying to break that association from the cue and response. And if we've got a good habit that we want to build, we want to make sure that cue's there as much as possible, so that we do that on a more regular basis. Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, it's a really good example. Thanks, Joe. Any more?
When I quit smoking, I found that going to the dairy, no matter how many times I tried to, I would automatically walk out a cigarette. I
glad that someone did bring up smoking, because there's so many cues to smoking, right? Like it's a really hard. That's what
but that was the one
about.
I couldn't break. I had to actually stop going to the dairy until I'd broken that habit, and then I could go there safely.
And that's just great awareness to know that as well, right? Like it's sort of that eureka moment where you realise that every time you walk into the dairy, you walk out with a pack of cigarettes, and then just actually saying, no, I'm not going to go to the dairy. So you remove that cue.
Yeah.
You go to the dairy now, and it's gone. That association's gone.
I had to break the habit before I could be safe
exactly.
with the cue.
That's a really good one. Smoking. There's lots of cues for smoking for a lot of people. Yeah.
I've got a bit of a phone addiction first thing in the morning, so I've made a pact with myself that the first 10 minutes I won't go near my phone.
Yeah.
Or when I go for a walk, I won't take the phone with me. So, but it's just a habit you keep going to. I've found that quite hard, not to look at my phone for the first 10 minutes.
It's a tough one, eh? And there's I'm doing the same thing as much as possible. My phone has the alarm on it, so I have to switch it off. But then I'll put my phone aside, and actually I've got a little list of things that I like to do every morning. So it takes about 30 minutes, and once I've done those, I can touch the phone. So that phone thing we're addicted to phones. It's really hard to get off.
I've got a fantastic app called Forest, something like that.
Yeah, it's called Forest. Yeah.
Forest, and what you do is you plant a tree, and while the tree's growing, you can't open your phone. It's fantastic.
It's really good.
And actually, after you've grown a certain amount of trees, a real tree is planted somewhere in the world as well.
Yeah, so it's like a charitable app. It's really good.
Yeah.
And if you open your phone while the tree's growing, the tree dies, which makes you really sad. So it's negative reinforcement that's going on there. But it's a really good app. Yeah.
It is, and you can set the amount of time you want to grow a tree for. If you're like,
Can
no,
you
I
take
just
my
need.
kanga?
That'd be good. Yeah.
But yeah, you can do like 15 minutes to 2 hours, right? I think. It didn't work for me. I know worked for Molly, but it wasn't the thing that I stuck with.
Well, I like colours and pretty
Yeah.
lights, so there's a lot of colours and pretty lights in the app, so it's very exciting.
But that's part of the thing. Like all these different strategies apply to some people, but not to others. Some people have different ways of dealing with things. So yeah, it's a good one.
There is some
Forest.
irony to using an app.
I know.
It's not phone.
It's like the only app I use now.
I mean, it's the same as I was thinking that about meditation apps as well. Using an app to become mindful, where the reason that a lot of people aren't mindful is because they use it in the first place. But there's some really good apps out there. There's an app for that. So we're going to go through a few tips. So these are just how to build good habits. So the first one we've already mentioned. Same time, same place. So this is just repetition essentially. So location and time are the two of the strongest habit predictors. I think I'm thinking more in exercise here because that's my field. But if you repeat the behaviour over and over again in the same time, in the same place, the more you do that, the stronger the habit's going to become. So repetition is the number one thing for habits. One thing to remember is that in the early days of making a habit, 9 times out of 10 you might not want to go through with it, but just be aware that you're in the sort of early days of habit formation, and the more you do it, the stronger it's going to get, and before you know it, you'll just be doing it automatically. So it seems like a really obvious tip, but it's one of the most fundamental aspects of creating a habit. Just repeat and repeat. Tip 2, prioritise. Now we talked about doing lots of things at once. It goes back to the cake formula. This is funny. The to-do list, the never-ending to-do list. We can't do everything at once. When we're trying to change behaviour, it takes a lot of mental effort in the early days to create these habits. So one thing to do is prioritise. So if you've got lots of change to make, choose the most important ones first. So there's a space here, you can do this now or you can do it another time, but to establish the first habit that you want to make first and then add the other ones later. So just be realistic in terms of what you can actually achieve. So there is a space on the worksheet to actually rank your habits and resolutions in order of importance. Always work on the first one first. Tip 3, preparation. Prepare the night before. So, essentially, if you prepare the night before, it means that if the habit's in the morning, for example, you want to go for a run, if you've got all your stuff set up, ready to go, it means that your brain doesn't have to do any work in the morning, which means that the habit is more likely to be formed. So if you've got everything, I do the same for writing sometimes. If I know that I want to write in the morning, I'll make sure that the desk is clear, pens are there, laptop's all ready to charge. So then in the morning I'm not like sort of trying to fiddle around and trying to get loads of stuff together. It means that I'm ready to write as soon as I get up. So yeah, exercise is a really important one as well. So usually, not that you want to be getting up at 6 AM to go for a run, but if you were, then you'd want to try and get everything ready for you first thing in the morning. Because, you know, when you wake up in the morning, motivation's low as it is usually. So the more excuses you've got, so trying to fish out your trainers or get your kit together, the least likely you are to actually go for that run. So just think about the actions that you need to take to prepare for your habits. It's a really important one. Yeah. Tip 4 is to reward yourself. So we said that any positive outcome that's connected with the cue and the response is really good at making sure that that's repeated. So make sure that you're getting rewards, because good habits aren't always instantly rewarding. They can be, but sometimes they're often not. So couple the behaviour with an instant reward. And there's a sort of caveat here, there's an exception here. So make sure that the reward that you're bringing in doesn't undo the habit. So for example, if you've gone for a run, don't go and get a big burger. It's not a good idea. So what instant rewards could you use to develop a habit? So just have a think about rewards that you could use for the habits that you want to create. If it's something that's not particularly pleasant. Tip 5, we talked about cues. Use the power of cues. So we're talking about alternative cues here. Anything can become a cue as long as you repeat it with the behaviour as much as possible. So, for example, the music. Well, I used to struggle to focus when reading research articles, so all I do is actually choose an album. It's actually by a band called Explosions in the Sky, which doesn't sound like it's the most focusing music in the world, but it's actually really nice and it's instrumental, no words. But what I'd do is every time that I had to sit down and read this research articles, I would play the same album, and eventually this album became a cue for me to sit there and focus, and it works. I mean, it worked during a PhD at least. People use classical music for the same reason sometimes. So even if you want to go out and do some exercise, if you find a track that's particularly uplifting for you, you can use that as a cue. Just every time you go for a run or to the gym, put that one on first, and it can become a cue to your body so that you're going to get ready for action and start going. So it's really powerful. Smartphones and smartwatches are cues for some people. They're not really my bag. I don't really like using smartphones as cues, but they do work for a lot of people, notifications and stuff. I think my smartphone already gives me enough notifications, to be honest. But the idea is to repeat these cues with the behaviour, and eventually they'll become cues themselves. Tip 6, a couple new and established habits. So if you've got 2 habits, you've got one that's you do anyway on a regular basis, and you're trying to include something else, then you can couple it with that. So for example, a really good example here, eating and walking. So if you, obviously everybody eats here, if one of your resolutions is to get some exercise, a really good one is to actually couple the eating with the walking. Not at the same time, it's probably not great for your digestion, but putting the walking prior to or just after, that can work as a habit for you to actually go for a walk. And there's actually really good, there's some research at the university here that talks about how important walking is after a meal. It's good for your diabetes prevention and cardiovascular disease. So they're actually really good habits to couple together. We already eat anyway, so why don't you just couple that with a 5-minute walk afterwards? What's that?
I was just saying, how do you eat immediately after?
Depends on how vigorously you're going to walk. Like a nice sort of slow walk is good. I mean, we've known this for thousands of years, right? That walking after a meal is good for digestion as well. But as long as you're not going to go and start doing burpees or shuttles, you're alright. So what existing habits could you couple with new habits? Something to think about. And then we're going to talk about habit stacking. So we talked about routines. This is exactly what we're going to talk about now. So habit stacking is where you take a small behaviour, a small habit, and you stack them on top of each other so you get this routine. So we've got a habit here. If you can't see, this is a toothbrush. Everyone cleans their teeth in here, I imagine. So that's an established habit that we do every single morning. We get up and clean our teeth. Say, for example, that you wanted to add on a 5-minute meditation. What you do, every time you clean your teeth, you do a meditation. So 5 minutes. So this is what we just talked about. This is coupling, essentially. But we can build that up and add more habits into this stack. So only once you've made sure that that's established, that you're certain that the clean the teeth is always going to be followed by meditation, you add another one. So in this case, it could be preparing some food for the day, a healthy meal. And you keep repeating those together, repeat, repeat, repeat. And when you're convinced that these are all been established together, every single morning you get up, you clean your teeth, you meditate 5 minutes, and then you get a fresh meal, a healthy meal, you can add another one. So in this case, we're going for a 5-minute walk. So you can keep doing this, and you create these sort of routines. I mean, at the moment, for example, I've got a routine of, I think, 10 behaviours that in the morning I'll do. None of these routines, none of these habits take longer than 5 minutes, which is really important, because you don't want them to last too long. And for 30 minutes for the whole routine. So you could have up to 10 behaviours that you stack up on top of each other. So it's really important that you just establish the couples first, and then you just build up on a slow basis. Tip 8, sleep. Cindy, you like this one? Although I'm not going to tell you how to sleep, I'm just going to tell you that you should sleep. So this is, I've been really obsessed with sleep recently. I think it's such an important aspect of the domain of research that needs to be done. Before habits become habits, they take a lot of effort. And if we're fatigued because we haven't got much sleep, we're going to fall into old habits. That's just what's going to happen. So sleeping, not only for mental health, physical health, but also for behaviour change is so important. I could go into like a whole other workshop about sleep, so I'm not going to do that now because I'll probably send you to sleep. But a good question to ask is, are you getting 7+ hours sleep a night? Because anything under 7 hours means that you're chronically sleep deprived. I've been reading a book, Matthew Walker, Why We Sleep. Really recommend it. Don't know if it's in the library, but it's a guy, a sleep scientist from the US, and he talks about the importance of sleep and how you can actually sleep better. But he says that, you have, some people say that they can survive on less than 4 hours sleep a night, you get these. I think Trump says it, Donald Trump says it, Margaret Thatcher used to say it, Ronald Reagan used to say it, almost like it's a badge of honour that if you can sleep less than 5 hours a night, then it's a really positive thing. But actually it's less than 1% of the population can actually survive on that amount of sleep, so it's really important that we get them sleep. I'm going to stop boring you with that one now, but please, sleep. Mindfulness. So mindfulness is a great thing for many things, like, again, it's good for physical health and mental well-being, all these sorts of stuff. But it also has a huge impact on whether you can stick to your behaviours. And this was the crux of my PhD research here, was how meditation and mindfulness can actually help you stick to new behaviours, specifically exercise. So we should all learn to live in the present moment. Mindfulness, there's lots of definitions of mindfulness that you can come across, but many of them come down to two aspects, which is present moment awareness and acceptance. So it's really important to be mindful when it comes to behaviour change, because present moment awareness of thoughts, feelings, sensations that make us aware of habitual responses. If we're aware of what's going on around us and inside, we're aware of our cues and habitual responses to things. Also become aware of our own excuses. Now, this comes down to self-talk. Whenever we try and change behaviour, we end up sometimes talking ourselves out of it. Our minds are fantastic storytellers, and whenever we're trying to do something that's not comfortable, our mind will try and tell us little fibs about, trying to get us out of that behaviour. So being aware of our own excuses is really important, and this is what's taught by mindfulness. Also awareness of what we value. So we talked about this in the first workshop, but increased mindfulness gets us in touch with our own values. It's less ego-driven, but more things that actually we care about as opposed to other people caring about us. That's a really important aspect. And again, that's what my research looks at. And then acceptance. It's really important to be self-compassionate when we're changing behaviour, because we talked about failure before, and it comes into it here. But we're not going to be perfect every time, and it's good to have that self-compassion. It's really, really important. And mindfulness helps to cultivate that self-compassion and acceptance. Plus, as I said, mindfulness increases mental well-being, so why shouldn't you do it? It's good. Then, last one, tip 10, tools for habit forming. So these are specific tools that I've come across. There's so many out there, but the first one I'm going to mention is Stick. Has anyone heard of Stick before? It's pretty new. So it comes in app form and website form. It's free. So it's actually developed by Harvard University researchers based on lots of psychological research and behavioural economics. Essentially, it's an app and a website that brings in accountability, because you actually type in what you want to do. It sends you automatic reminders, so it'll send you an email saying, have you done this behaviour this week? And the good thing about it is you can actually assign referees. So if you've got someone, we talked about social accountability, you can assign one of your friends to be a referee for this thing. So if you say that you want to go running 30 minutes 5 times a week, you put that into the app or the website, and then you can say whether you want that to be sent to somebody else, and they can check up on you, which is really good. The other thing that it does is provides rewards, or actually it doesn't, it actually punishes you if you don't do it. Now, we talked about punishments and rewards being not great for if it's the source of motivation. If you're doing things because you want to avoid punishment or gain a reward, if that's the main reason for motivation, it's not great. But they use it really well here. So what you can do is gamble on yourself. You can put money, say $10, to say that you'll do this for 6 months, for example. So you'll go running for 6 months. And if you fail to do it, you pay $10 and it goes to a charity of your choosing, which is really cool. I think it's really good. There's lots of others out there, but honestly, I haven't used them. I've used Stick, so that's the one that I'll endorse, if anything. There's Habatica, Coach Me is another one. There's a few. I mean, feel free to explore, but that's a really good one. And it's free, which is good, unless you gamble. Physical planners and diaries. So this is all good for reflection, prioritising, scheduling the stuff that we've talked about today. So for example, I've got one, it's a physical activity planner, which gets you to reflect on things that matter to you and goals that you want to do for the rest of the week. So that's really good when it comes to habit forming, because it comes down to that time and place and being specific. I'm using this at the moment, high performance planner. So it's a guy called Brendan Bouchard. If you look at his advertising, he's very sort of rambunctious in his advertising, but that's a really good thing to use. Lots of place for reflection. In fact, I've got it right here. So if you want to look at one, I'll have to show you at the end. So it gives you like weekly reflections, daily reflections. What's the most meaningful thing for you today? And mindset and all that sort of stuff. So that's really good. And then finally, Frank. Has anyone heard of Frank? Stationery company in New Zealand. Really, really good. So New Zealand based, New Zealand made, and quite similar to this diary here on a smaller scale, but it encourages a lot of reflection. There's lots of different types. There's project planners, to-do lists. I mean, that's what resolution making is. It's a project for yourself. So that's why these are really good. So that's pretty much what I've got today. You can see all these things that we've brought up: repetition, prioritising, preparing, rewarding, finding cues, motivation, setting smarter goals. Now, the point of this isn't to be an overwhelming workshop, it's just to give you a taste of what sort of tools you can use. I wouldn't expect anyone to go out there and try and put everything into action, because that is going to be overwhelming. And we talked about prioritising stuff, but try and select 2 or 3 different techniques that we've gone through, and maybe try and action them in your own resolutions. I think it's a really good thing to do, and just have a bit of self-compassion about it. But most importantly, and we've said this time and time again, choose a resolution that you enjoy or find value in, and it won't be a resolution at all. That's the main thing. If you find value in it, or if you enjoy it, then you won't feel like hard work when you're trying to change behaviour. Cool. And that's it for me. Any questions? Well, we've got like 10 minutes. So are there any particular questions, burning questions? Yes, Joe?
Can you explain to the group what you would do in a session, like what you offer as a one-on-one?
Oh yeah, yeah. So like I said, this is a new venture for me. The Mensana movement is me putting into practice over 10 years of working with behaviour change. And what I try and do workshops like this, obviously, but also working one-to-one a lot of the time. So that's, I mean, you say, what do I do in a session? It's actually really broad. What the first thing I do is get a blank piece of paper, and we just, with a person, I'll sit down and ask them what they want to do, and just start from there. Because there's so many different ways of approaching different problems. So I think that's the key point, is actually tailoring things to different people. People have different ways of working things out, but yeah, exploring what people value is a really important aspect of it, and that's what we did in that first workshop, because that's the foundation for change. And I think we've discussed this as well, right? The importance of values is really important. So yeah, it's a really broad question, but what I try and do is help people set goals and create action plans that actually work for people as individuals, yeah, regardless of the behaviour. Yeah.
How often do you see people?
How often?
Weekly, or would you say monthly?
It depends on the person again. They seem like politician answers, but some people want to see, you know, if it's an early stage of a big change, you need to see on a regular basis. But then some people just want to come in and say hello, and just some accountability. We talked about accountability before. That's a really important aspect. Not everyone has people around them that can support them in this way, so it's good to have someone just to air it with sometimes. So yeah.
You're streaming it right now, but is this going to be available online somewhere for us to look at yet?
Yeah. The last time, in fact, the first workshop is available on stream as well. It's on my Facebook page, the Mensana Movement Facebook page, and it'll be the same with this one as well. I'll make sure it's available. So yeah, if there's anyone that needs any of the worksheets or the slides themselves, you can just pop your email address on the sign-up sheet, and I can send them out to you. It's no problem. Yeah.
Can you explain to me, I just heard a new thing here is about meditating.
Yeah.
What would you, like for me, just coming out of thing to learning that about behavioural thing, how would you pick a subject to meditate?
Pick subjects?
Yeah, for meditation and that, you know, say you get 5 minutes or however long you want to have it. So what would you do?
As a starting point?
Yes.
I think as a starting point, and Joe's actually a meditation teacher, so really good person to speak to about this. But as a starting point, I just say, just sit down for even 2 minutes and just don't do anything for 2 minutes. Because actually it's quite a big shift to not meditating, to trying to do these, even 10-minute meditations can be quite difficult for someone who's just starting out. So just sitting down in a chair, turning the lights off and having nothing on in the background.
Just close the world off.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And just be with yourself for a bit, because I think that's really important. We don't do that enough. I've actually taken to using earplugs for meditation, because it just switches everything off and you can just completely immerse yourself. A really common way and a really good way of doing it is breathing, because the breath is an anchor. We all breathe, so all you've got to do is just listen to your breath, and even doing that for like 5 minutes is really, really powerful actually. There's some box breathing techniques that are really good to sort of get you working, and you notice a difference. I think you really notice a difference.
I think, Matt, the box breathing is probably one of the biggest things that you could give to anybody today if they want to learn how to meditate.
Yeah, So, has anyone heard of box breathing before? Alright, so idea of box breathing is you can try it with me now if you want, but you breathe in to the count of 4, you hold that breath at the top for 4 seconds, then you breathe out to the count of 4, and you hold at the bottom for 4 seconds, and you just repeat that. Do you want to try it? Alright. You can put I usually put my hand on my chest, I don't know why, it's just
And
to have it.
you should make a noise when you breathe out.
Oh really?
Yeah.
Okay, there we go. So we'll start. So we're trying to get a big exhalation first.
And you should breathe into your stomach rather than into your chest.
Stomach into chest, okay.
Yep.
So we're going to breathe in for 4 seconds to the top. 2, 3, 4, and hold for 4. 2, 3, 4, and release for 4, nice and slow. 2, 3, 4, and hold for 4. 2, 3, 4. We go up again. 2, 3, 4. Hold at the top. 2, 3, 4. Up and down. 2, 3, 4, and hold. 2, 3, 4. So that was just 2 rounds. And usually, what, Joe? What, 5? To start off with.
That's the whole box.
Oh yeah, 4. So yeah, just
And
that mindset change.
What that does is it, especially if you're in a crisis situation or you're feeling uncomfortable or anxious, it puts the oxygen back to your frontal cortex. So it puts the oxygen where your brain needs it.
Yeah.
So when we're anxious, we go into our core or into our reptile brain, and we need to bring ourselves back to the front, and that gives us a chance to reset and start to just focus on our breathing without anything else.
Yeah, so the whole meditation mindfulness stuff, I've noticed attitude changes towards it in the last few years. But there's so much evidence for it, and in terms of the physiology, the neurophysiology of the brain, so much evidence for that now, and how powerful it can be. So it's gone from this sort of, I think previously it was sort of a wishy-washy idea. Meditation, you're going to sit there with like your lowest position with incense burning, legs crossed and all that sort of stuff, but it's not that at all. It's actually a real sort of psychological, neuropsychological effect that we can do. So even that box breathing, did anyone notice anything, like any sort of calm come over them or anything like that?
A bit like heaven.
Yeah, it's really powerful stuff. Oh, any other questions?
There's quite good apps though. Say Insight Timer is one.
Yeah.
I just thought it's great.
Insight Timer, Headspace is a really good one. Calm, Smiling Mind, there's 4 straight off the bat.
10% happier.
What's that?
One called 10% happier, meditation for fidgety skeptics.
Oh really? I haven't heard that one. Is it good? You use that one?
They have little tutorials and things, or you can just have a timer, so you can, they have like tutorials called meditation, mindfulness for grumpy people. And
Yeah.
quite like
So it actually speaks to a lot of people that will be skeptic as well, right? Skeptical. It's really important. It's getting through to a demographic that probably really need it, actually. Yeah. Yeah, cool. Any more? We're just about at 7 o'clock, so we're all good. Yeah, cheers for coming, guys. Like I said, if you want any other materials, I'll, or even like the Facebook page, and I can put some of these apps that we talked about today, I'll put links on there, or a little document or something. But feel free to put your email address on the sign up, and I'm not the person who spams people, but I'll send out some files if you need them.
For those of us who don't have Facebook, are you able to add it to like the website or something like that?
Yeah, I can do that. Some resources, I'll do a resources page. I haven't got one at the moment, but that's a really good point. I can do that. Yeah, I'll do that tomorrow in fact. Yeah, sweet.
Your podcast, I thought it could be something.
Oh yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, we did a podcast. Joe runs a company called Truce, so it's mediation and also mindfulness meditation. And we did a podcast together that's now on Otago Access Radio. So that's The Wise and Well, is that what it's called? So there's 3 of us that did that podcast, and the first one was on Sunday, just gone. It's available for download. So we talked about change. So see Joe's background and my own background is a, I guess, psychology background, and we've got an educational psychologist that was with us as well. So yeah, I mean, I really enjoyed it. So you'll have to listen to it to make your own judgment, but it was a really cool thing to do. So yeah, try and listen
And
to
we'll
that.
be doing it monthly.
Yeah, we're doing it monthly for the rest of the year. Yeah, have a listen. Cool. All right, all good. Thanks for coming, guys. It's really cool to meet you all. Thank you. So this one here, so you get yeah, it's really cool. The Frank ones are really good. That's but it's like that a lot. There's a lot of free content there. Get deals. Yeah, there is that sort of passion. Not just planned. But I'm planning to try and set some stuff up in the because the idea was it was only going to be one part of it, I'd like to, so I'm trying to find places in different communities to do it. So not just here, but as many different places as possible.
I was literally just started doing a couple of weeks ago, and I feel like, because I don't know, I feel like sometimes I go into like an automatic little girl kind of mode, and like, you know,
So, you are hard.
but it doesn't matter.
You are hard.
Yeah, and then you can consciously decide how you want
Season
to
one. Yeah.
I'm a musician, so a songwriter. Yeah, so the songwriting is the one that I sometimes you can just write all day. Yeah. Oh, cool.
Yeah, what's your name, sorry? Sonny. Matt. Yeah. Nice to meet you.
Right, the slides. Alright, so if you put...
Yeah, thank you.
Good to go? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers.